I would love to bring our first two speakers to the stage. We have Jesse Klein and Dr. Paul Zamudio. Jesse is from Acadia, and Dr. Zamudio is from Sound Physicians. And I think we're even being live streamed into his hospital center today. So we have an amazing opportunity to hear from both of them and hear his story. And I'm going to put this slide up while they speak. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Nice to see you all. And I just want to extend a sincere sense of gratitude to Dr. Zamudio and his wife, Samantha, who are both with us today. I work for Acadia Pharmaceuticals as part of the patient advocacy and industry relations team. And Dr. Zamudio is here as a father with a daughter with Rett and also a physician. And I think that he'll have a lot of interesting perspective to share with you from those different points of view that are equally important in their lives. So I'd like to just start by asking you to tell us a little bit about your family.
My wife, Samantha, is here. Our two children, Sophia, who's 6, has Rett syndrome, and Sebastian is 4. Both of them are in school right now, so they can't be here, but they're on screen, as you can see. So our family, we're just regular people. You know, it's not, we're no special, we're no different than anyone else. Sophia, our wonderful daughter, this is actually the year anniversary of her being diagnosed, April 10th. And she had a normal birth, normal prenatal care, came out wonderful, beautiful, feisty. And, 15 months in, we started noticing her not hitting her milestones. Her pediatrician was also concerned. We had numerous tests, as everyone can imagine. She was diagnosed at that point with global developmental delay, epilepsy, esotropia, which is inversion of the eye, typically when she's stressed, as every child is, 24 hours of the day. But as a father and as a physician, I always knew that there was something different. It wasn't, you can always see in your child that it's not what you see on paper, it's what you see in your child. And, I always get choked up when I talk about this because, as a physician, I'm on both sides of the curtain. And I treat patients with special needs, with rare diseases all the time. And when it hits to home, at that point, I actually was like, I flipped a lot of my play cards that I have for a lot of my patients with special needs and rare diseases. So essentially, she was started on Keppra, which is an anti-seizure medication for her epilepsy. And we did the microarray testing, which showed there was no abnormalities. So we foregone the exome testing, which they did offer. However, the neurologist, the pediatrician, a lot of my friends who I went to school with, developmental pediatricians, neurologists as well, said it's not needed. There's really nothing else to think of or anything to rule out at this point. It's likely that she's autistic. So we went with that diagnosis for several years. And 3 years into it, she's still on Keppra. She never had a seizure, actually, however, was diagnosed with epilepsy. And as a physician, I said, what's the end game? You need to know an end game if you're putting a patient on medications. There was no end game. So they offered exome testing, which, to our surprise, my wife and I, really to my surprise, that it costs literally from $700-800 to even $28,000 out of pocket, which is absurd, and insurance does not cover. So they offered that as a way to rule out anything else that could be on the table, whether or not she's going to be taken off of Keppra or not. And in my mind, and I later told my wife, I was like, it's either has a name, whatever Sophia is dealing with, or it's a 26-letter number chromosome that we don't know, and we're going to look through the files and figure out what matches and what works. And sure enough, April 10th, we had the meeting with the genetic counselor. and she confirmed that Sophia had Rett syndrome. Everyone at that point was floored. I learned about it, I read about it, I've treated patients with Rett syndrome. My daughter was not that. She was not textbook Rett syndrome. And at that point, I was just like, listen, this is what it is. This is not Sophia. She's not the disease. She's not the genetic condition. She's still my beautiful daughter. No one can take that away from her. And she's been wonderful from that point on. You know, her and Sebastian, his nickname is Bash, you know, happy as can be. Best brother and sister team ever, so.
That's beautiful, and thank you for sharing that. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the support and resources that you and your family have needed over the last year since you've gotten a concrete diagnosis that was unexpected?
So from that point on, we met with Dr. Jacobs, who works at Montefiore, which is the hospital system I'm associated with, which was also a blessing. So we started off with Dr. Jacobs with follow-up visits, and her school district that we moved into has been instrumental in this because literally everything that she's ever needed for therapy, for school, for anything, they happily gave that to her without even asking. They did their own research. They did a lot of legwork that I've heard a lot of other school districts, literally just next to us, never did. And we were so blessed for that. We met with the people from the International Rett Syndrome Foundation. We've set a lot of events in motion for Rett syndrome awareness. We've met with Acadia, who have been wonderful with us. And just overall support from the community, from my workplace, from families from other special needs families, and just people that are just interested to know what Rett syndrome is and, you know, how they can help Sophia prosper in life. So.
That's great to hear. I'm so glad you feel like you've got some surround sound support because it takes a village, right?
Absolutely.
So in terms of some of the work that you've already been doing, you and Samantha, could you tell us like maybe a story about some of the advocacy things that you've been personally undertaking?
So at this point, so I do a lot of physical stuff. I do a lot of half marathons. I just ran the New York City Marathon for Sophia, for Boston Children's last year. I made it, thank goodness. And you know, it was great because you know the whole family was there at the finish line. And you know, if you've ever ran the New York City Marathon, it literally funnels through in Central Park, gets louder and louder, more emotional. And who's ran the New York City Marathon? Yeah, you know that feeling, right? It's special, it's emotional. And I see my kids in the stands, and I just started crying. And I was just like, this was it. This was why I did it. All the miles, all the training, it was meant to be. So, you know, in going with that, I've done several Barry's Boot Camp classes to raise awareness for Rett syndrome, just because, you know, my daughter, she's functional. However, you know, her tone is not great. She's not able to really partake in sports, even though she does her best at ballet. She swims, she does horseback riding for therapy. The most instrumental thing I must say that we bought since she's ever been diagnosed was a trampoline. That's the best thing ever. Her legs are like tree trunks now. But, you know, my wife, she's gonna be doing the strollathon with the International Rett Syndrome Foundation later this year. And it's ongoing. And with unwavering support from everyone, from Acadia, from IRSF, from, you know, our hometown, it's just gonna be ongoing no matter what.
That's good, as it should be. Can you tell us about any kind of concerns that you have, you know, just maybe right now in the future that may relate to the ongoing support for you and your family and Sophia?
So, you know, with the healthcare issues nowadays, this kind of hits close to home. Sophia's lost several of her therapists, her ABA therapists, which do visit at home after she goes home from school. She has her therapist come Monday to Friday, 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., and we lost them. There's not that many therapists going around, and they're widely needed for not just Rett, for all special needs children, and it's heartbreaking. And she's made such a close relationship to those therapists, and for them to be stripped away from her, it's like she doesn't have her best friend. And we've gone through 3 now since we moved to Westchester, and yeah, each one just taken away. And can I talk about the future stuff?
Please.
So being an ICU physician, I see a lot of special needs, rare disease patients towards the end of life. Usually I'm one of the few faces they see at the end. And a lot of rare disease parents, a lot of special needs parents, they don't know this, but after the age of 18, when the child files for Medicaid, the parents, the caregivers, they lose the decision-making capacity of whether or not their child is able to live or die. And so, for lack of better words, the patient becomes a property of the state, even though there's viable loved ones. And it breaks my heart, it breaks the family's hearts that they're not able to have their loved one pass in peace, not strapped to any machines, getting medications that are artificially keeping them alive. And it's frustrating, emotionally, physically, psychologically. But it's something that needs to be reformed. And I've made it my job, essentially, to, at least in my lifetime, try to make something happen to reform that.
And that's something I did not know until you shared it with us. And it does seem cruel and unkind to the entire family.
Correct.
Can you tell us a little bit about, in terms of like research and access to clinical trials and your hopes for the future in terms of, you know, just in general, getting all the possibilities open?
So right off the bat with the genetic counselor, I mean, they already did their due diligence. They did the research. They linked us up with Boston Children's, with Dallas. I believe there was one on the West Coast as well. But of course, with us being here, Boston Children's was going to be our clinical trial center. However, since Dr. Jacobs is one of the leading researchers in Rett, she's already made strides so that Montefiore in the Bronx would be a center of excellence and a research center for Rett. So we transitioned over to Montefiore. So thank goodness, like, this was a blessing that I started working for Montefiore, actually. So they were more than willing to link us up with whatever, clinical trial center. And it's one of those things that I hope that things do change in the future, at least soon enough, that rare diseases, they get their time to shine. They get their funding that they need. Because to spend such little money on rare disease research and treatment, it's sad, If anything, to at least alleviate some of the pain and the suffering that some of the families and the patients they have, it has to happen. It just has to happen.
Absolutely. And right now, I think we're all watching to make sure that certain things can stay intact.
Absolutely.
It's a time of change, and there's been a lot of hard work that's been done, but there's
Correct.
a lot of
Yeah.
hard work that we need to continue to do. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience? Anything that comes to mind before we open it up to questions?
Like I said earlier, Sophia, I'm looking at the pictures, and the one on the right that we were on a Disney cruise, and that was the greatest thing ever for the kids. And on the left is us in Tarrytown, right on the Riverwalk. And I look at those pictures and I always think to myself, that's Sophia. That's not Rett syndrome. That's not a genetic. I have her gene mutation tattooed on my arm, and I'm like, this is not her. That's her.
And I think there's probably a lot of people in this room that know someone who has a rare disease or are a parent of someone who has a rare disease. And I think that we can all say that we don't want them to be defined by their condition. We want them to be defined by the best life that they can lead. I think that that's a common goal of many people in this room. So I think now, does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
Hi, Matthew Zachary, founder of Stupid Cancer, 30-year survivor. How has this lived experience informed your medical practice?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
How has this regrettable lived experience, you're shopping in a store you never asked to be inside of, informed your medical practice?
It's not so much informed, it's changed it in the way that I'm more on eye level with those types of patients. And I've actually wiped the word normal from what I say to certain families, because this is their normal. You know, not a lot of, everyone compares normal to the stereotypical normal that we all know, that we grew up with, but this is my normal. That's their normal. How can I make their lives somewhat easier in what I can do for them? You know, the medicine's the same. You know, the practice is the same. It's the same textbook knowledge. It's the same protocols and algorithms. But being a doctor nowadays, it's about bringing the humanity back into healthcare. And I always tell, like, the students that I work with, the junior doctors, the fellows, even new doctors, that you never take the patient out of the equation. And in that way, if you do that, you take away the humanity out of the person. And that's what I've always strived to instill in people. And that's what I've amplified in my own practice.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Ginger Davis. I'm with the Sickle Cell Thalassemia Patients Network. I did wanted to know, how old was Sophia when she got properly diagnosed?
She was 5, right? Yeah.
She was 5.
Just 1 year, yeah.
So your pathway was 5 years
Yes.
to this diagnosis. I really do appreciate you for saying, you know, she's not Rett, this is my Sophia, because in sickle cell, we are distilled down and pretty much stigmatized just by the diagnosis. Our humanity is not seen, understood, or respected. And I think that's, you know, in rare disease, it might be common in other disorders, but that's something that we need to bring to the health industry, is to stop distilling people to their diagnosis. It's so important, because we are so much more than that. Later, I would definitely love to speak with you about the
Please.
policy work that you want to do, especially for the caregivers. And then I have a question for you, Ms. Klein. What is the average time to diagnosis for people with Rett's, and is it because of the lack of education by providers in noticing, you know, the symptoms, or even figuring out, let's go get, you know, special panels? And what can parents, advocates, and community organizations do to help educate providers on making proper diagnosis for rare disorders?
Great question. Rett is normally diagnosed by around 2 years old, but everything has to be kind of in the right place at the right time. Unfortunately, a lot of Rett children are initially thought to have either autism or cerebral palsy, neither of which are really a proper diagnosis, because there's a large number of patients that end up possibly being put into those two diagnosis categories. I think Samantha and Paul's experience of finally getting the answers that they needed was they're really wanting to turn over every stone. I think the children living in areas that are closer to a neurology center of excellence probably have a better opportunity of being diagnosed appropriately. We're also learning that there are some boys with Rett. It was always considered just a disease of young girls, but there are a few young boys that are born with Rett too. I think we're getting better. I think it's so important to never forget that there are patients kind of out in other areas that maybe haven't had the proper diagnosis yet. And I believe that it's all of our missions. As I always say, rising tides raise all ships. Everything that we can do to raise awareness will help these families to get a diagnosis more quickly. Because even when it's bad news, knowledge is power.
And if I can add on to that, I think the cost of testing, it's outrageous. Mm-hmm. How can you expect, you know, middle America family to just shell out $8,000 for a genetic test out of pocket in hopes possibly it's this or that. The microarray testing would test for Down, Angelman syndrome, things like that, the more typical things that would be seen. But rare diseases, $7,800 to $28,000, who's going to pay that?
Right.
So that's why, it's like, I truly believe that since Rett is almost a spectrum disease, like what you said, it touches between autism, epilepsy, even cerebral palsy. It's a wide spectrum. Sophia, I think, at least for what she is, she's on the milder side. I've treated patients on the severe side. So it's the access to genetic testing, that's a big thing, because you need genetic testing to confirm Rett syndrome. Since it affects the MECP2 gene on the X chromosome, it needs to be determined. And since the therapy is for that, it's, a lot of families don't have that money. They don't have the access to that. Yes, there's so much.
Can I go first? Yes. Hi, my name's Hani. I work at Pfizer, and
Yes.
thank you, Doctor. I really appreciated your story. And just to ask your thoughts, because in Pfizer I worked in rare disease, and I wonder what your experience was when, I don't know if there are any current ongoing Rett clinical trials. At least in Pfizer we don't have them. But what has your experience been like regarding clinical trial participation? What has worked well? What do you think should be improved? If there's anything you'd like to let us know, we'd like to incorporate that the best we can.
So, we've been talking very closely with Dr. Jacobs primarily with the clinical trials. We were hoping to have Sophia put into a clinical trial maybe later this year, early next year, just to see, because, she's thriving in school. She loves school. And for her to have, the type of treatment I'm going to talk about, bless you, she's going to be out of school for several months. If there's some sort of way to give some sort of therapy, some sort of treatment, or just the clinical trial, not doing an intraventricular injection, which is essentially you drill a hole, you shave the head, drill a hole straight into the brain, and you deposit whatever sort of gene therapy directly into the ventricular space. If you can try to figure out some sort of intrathecal route or IV route, that would be better, just because these girls, some of the boys, they're not able to speak. They lose control of their bodies. They have seizures. God forbid you have intracerebral hemorrhage. You develop meningitis from an intraventricular shot. Our daughter, when she gets frustrated sometimes, or she gets pissed off, she bangs her head. Not violently, but just, if you have an intraventricular shot, she does that. I'm bringing her to the emergency room to check for a bleed, So that's one of the biggest hangups for us to undergo the clinical trials, is because of that knowledge. And that's the bad part about what I do, unfortunately, is because I am on both sides of the current at the same time. I try not to be, because I'm primarily her father, but as a physician, I know that these are the complications. And, if I know that, and I know how my daughter acts, I just don't know how to meld the two. But of course, everything's for Sophia's benefit and her future, but it's like, we can only do so much. But yes, if there could be some other way, some other trials, so that you could figure out some way to give gene therapy less indirectly, that'd be great. Yes.
So as a follow-up to that, so I guess, are the issues, is there opportunity, in terms of the trial being set up originally, is there opportunity for input for these kinds of, kind of patient sort of lifestyle and side effect type issues? How is, in such a rare disease, patient recruitment, finding enough patients for the trials, and the distances, they're relatively few places, so you were able to, convenience, and so these issues, to what degree are these problems, and what are potential solutions, and how can technology, input, things like that help?
So when we were first referred to Boston Children's, of course, several of my friends that live in the Boston area, Rhode Island area, Connecticut, they reached out to me immediately, and they're like, "You're not staying in a hotel. You're staying at our place. We'll find you work, and you'll stay with us. That's not a problem." We would have to live literally within a 2-hour radius of Boston Children's, of course, because if there's some sort of side effect, there's some sort of complication, you need to be brought into that center of excellence immediately, without a thought. Again, we're very fortunate. We have such a close circle of friends and family that are willing to put all that out there for us. The team at Montefiore has been instrumental in helping out as well, but for other families, for them to move, even when we went to Sham, people were driving hours and hours just to come for the day, for lectures, and that's their center of excellence.
Right.
Like they know the highways and the side roads better than their own homes, and for me that's tragic. It's like I don't think there's really no way around it though, because Rett is such a rare disease. It affects 1 in 10,000 girls, less in boys.
Oh, yes, way less.
And it's, the N needed for research, it's dwindling. If you get, say, some sort of therapy, you're not eligible for studies, and vice versa. So, that N is going to be smaller and smaller with every single trial and also you can get tachyphylaxis from treatment, which is essentially the medical term for, sorry, brain's not working right now. You're not getting the desired effect of overstimulation or overexposure. So yeah, with that, the N is very small in that field, in that community.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zamudio. We really appreciate it. Thanks, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.